All right, guys, welcome back to another Master and Apprentice video and podcast. As you guys can see, we got another book review. Today, we're going to be reviewing Lords of the Sith by Paul S. Kemp. This was one of the first books I read, so if I'm going to be honest, I read this probably 3 or 4 years ago. It's been quite a while. Appen just finally read it, so that's kind of why we're doing a review on it now. So it's not a new book or anything, but it's a fairly popular one. I remember when this came out, and a couple years later, people are still talking about it. This is one of those books that people either love or hate. And for more or less, without kind of breaking it down, it's because most of the novel is just pretty much about Vader and Palpatine doing a big side quest, which some fans like that and some fans don't. Some people want more lore breaking, involving, and some fans don't want that. They just want more character development. And that's kind of what this is about. So, with all those things being said, we're going to break it down a little bit and then give our final review at the end. So, if you guys don't want any spoilers, kind of cut to the end real quick. With that, this book's pretty much about a rebel uprising on the planet Ryloth. It kind of picks up what we've seen in the Clone Wars. Cham Syndulla, who we see in the Clone Wars, who is Hera Syndulla's father, is essentially planning a assassination on Palpatine. They figure out Palpatine and Vader are coming to Ryloth, and they're just trying to assassinate him, right? And it, obviously it doesn't go right because Vader and Palpatine are just fine, and obviously Cham's fine because we see him later on. But there's a lot of character development in between. We see a lot of cool fights with Vader, and like we really get to see it. I think the dark side of Vader in this novel, and I think that's probably the shining point for this. We see him, kind of just put it down on everybody, on animals and beasts in the wild, on innocent village people in Ryloth, on even some of his own guys. After they crash land, he just essentially unalives the royal guards because he doesn't want them to be in misery. So it's all really brutal, and it's very interesting and fun. It's a lot of great character development. I was a huge fan of when I read this. Now, like I said, it's been quite a while, so it's kind of hard for me to say I think I see it in the same light, but I don't look at this back with any bad in mind. It was a really fun, intriguing story, but there are some, honest points where it doesn't really have that much happening at the end of the day. It's just kind of like a side quest. But that's kind of what these novels are meant to be sometimes, and you can appreciate that for what it is. You have to go in knowing that this isn't going to be the most groundbreaking novel, but it's going to be a really fun story and a lot of cool character development. So for that, I enjoy it.
Yeah, this book does not have any huge influence on the main plot of Star Wars, on any of the Star Wars movies really at all, but it is something we do see in the TV shows quite a lot. We see the Free Ryloth movement in the Clone Wars, and we see it in the Bad Batch go from freeing themselves from the Separatists to freeing themselves from the Empire. So that's a cool development we get there. And then Cham Syndulla has all these contacts in the Rebel Alliance where they're talking to different people that we see in different places. I'm sure Saw Gerrera, I'm pretty sure, was mentioned a couple times. It's just cool to have these connections that we see behind the scenes. Cham Syndulla going in, trying to pretty much end the war by himself, right? Nothing happens until episode 6, and we know that. But for him to actually have an assassination attempt on Palpatine, the Emperor, and all this stuff is a cool thing to have just in existence because it makes a lot of sense. They were trying to end the war for years before Luke Skywalker came around and ended up being able to do so. So these things make sense to happen, and I love seeing some of the character development with both Darth Vader, Palpatine. We don't see a lot of thoughts and what Palpatine does and thinks and a lot of other Star Wars lore, and we get to see a lot of that here. Vader using his raw power, his raw strength is some of the coolest things ever. We get to see him take down a ship with the Force by itself. He's fighting in a dogfight, loses pretty much all control. I can't remember if he loses control to his weapons or he never had weapon systems. I think he might have never had weapon systems because it was a shuttle. But either way, he pretty much uses the Force and pulls a ship right out of the sky and just obliterates them with no weapon systems at all involved. Just cool scenes to read about and all this. But at the end of the day, it is a lot of plot development. So where we put other books a bit lower on the list for not having a huge effect to the plot, that'll probably come into effect. But it's still just a great book to read.
I would say the last point before we kind of give our final review is for a book that you kind of know isn't going to have too much just by the way they set it up on the overarching story, right? Like, Palpatine and Vader aren't going to be affected too much, and Champ Syndulla, who isn't a main character but who is one of the main characters of the story, isn't going to be affected. You feel like, you know, you might not get involved too much, but the story does a really good job of intriguing and involving you as a reader and like being interested in the story that's going on in this book. It does a good job, even though you kind of know in the back of your head this isn't going to have too much effect. It still does a good job of involving the reader. So with all that being said, we're going to go ahead and plug this into the tier list. So as you guys can see, we've got S, A, B, C, D. We've got quite a few in every tier. This, for me, like I said, when I first read it, I think would have been an S tier. But because I've had so many other novels to read, I think this would go either top of A or bottom of S. I think it's still a really good book. And a story alone, this is really, really interesting. And because this is, you know, a standalone book on characters that are super important to the Star Wars universe, like Palpatine and Vader, I think this is interesting enough on its own, right? Whereas Dooku and Ventress are more side characters. You see Dooku only once in one movie, or I guess technically two, but you only see him very briefly in the prequels. Ventress you only see a couple times in the Clone Wars, right? Tarkin you only see in A New Hope and a couple times in the Clone Wars. Where these characters are a lot more vital to the Star Wars universe, and I think it's got to be better than the Tarkin and Dooku book easily. But I could go anywhere from the bottom of S to the top of A for me.
I think I want to put it in the top of A. I think it was a great book. I mean, for it being a side project that didn't really have a lot of things to affect the main plot, it was really good in doing that. Where we have the book A New Dawn, that is not really affecting the main plot, but it's also characters that are already kind of side characters to the main plot. Yeah. These are the main characters of the plot. Vader, Anakin, he's the main character of the first 6 Star Wars movies, and Palpatine, who's also in the first 6 Star Wars movies, and it's character development on them too. Like, that's a really cool thing to have in there, and it does it really well. It's a captivating story. It's definitely not a first read. If you're going to look for deep lore books and cool stuff to understand new things about Star Wars, I wouldn't recommend it, but for something like just learning more about the characters, I think it's really good.
Yeah, I would strongly disagree. I think this is a really good book to recommend for your first read, just because these characters are a lot more established. If you've watched Star Wars, you know who Vader is, and if you've watched Star Wars, you know who Palpatine is, and if you've watched some of the other stuff like Clone Wars or Bad Batch or some of the animation, you knew who Champ Syndulla is. You knew who some of these other characters are, like Saw Gerrera are. And so this, I think, is a really good entry point into the Star Wars universe. It's a standalone book, and so if you don't like it, you don't have to get too involved. Whereas if you read the Thrawn book, you kind of get a little bit more involved with the character and the rest of the story. So all that being said, we're going to plug it into the top of A. So with that being said, let us know what you guys think down in the comments. If you guys have read this book, what you think of it, what you guys think of our overall review. If you guys agree, disagree. I think this is a good book. I don't think it's like a straight killer. I don't think this is like the best book, but I don't think it's a bad entry point at all. I think it's a pretty good book just to, if you want a good Star Wars story, I think this is good for that. So let us know what you guys think down in the comments. If you guys agree, disagree, what you guys think. With that, we hope you guys did enjoy this video. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. If you guys are on podcast, we appreciate it. Don't forget to hit that download and follow. And with that, we see you guys in the next one.
Peace.